From running out of time to gambling $1 million, this is how the Gold Rush crew struck $27 million before winter hit. Let's dive in. The ground was turning hard, the air growing thinner, and time was running out. Up in the frozen wilderness, winter doesn't come gently. It strikes fast, and when it does, it locks everything in place, sealing the earth in solid ice that not even the biggest machines can't fight through. There were only days left before the freeze took hold, before the gold-rich ground would vanish beneath months of snow and silence. And in that final window, just before everything froze over, 3 crews clawed their way through the dirt, chasing the kind of payday that could rewrite the season in one last breath. Parker Schnabel, Rick Ness, and Tony Beats each made their final moves, each pushing harder than they ever had. And somehow, through chaos, risk, and near disaster, over $27 million in gold was ripped from the ground just in time. But none of it came easy, and not everyone made it through clean. The season was slipping away, and for Parker Schnabel, the pressure was closing in faster than the frost line creeping under the surface of the Yukon. Every hour counted now, every scoop of dirt, every ounce of gold. But somewhere along the way, in all the planning and pushing and endless rushing, Parker had made a mistake that could have buried the entire operation right there in the ground. I started my life here, and my goal is to see if there's a lot better ground out there that we could be mining. He had forgotten to prep the elbow cut, a critical piece of pay dirt that now sat untouched, locked in permafrost that was getting harder with each passing minute. He knew the ground was freezing, and he could feel it. But there was no time left to do it right. No time to strip, dry, or rip it apart in layers like they were supposed to. So instead, he went all in and decided to brute force his way through the frost. He called in another D11 dozer, a monstrous piece of machinery, expensive to buy, run, and maintain. Together with the one he already had, he rammed both into the frozen cut, trying to rip through the ice-cemented dirt before it became a graveyard for the gold still buried beneath. And by doing so, Parker knew that he was burning briefcases of money every time these machines were being used. The engines screamed and the dozer blades clashed with frozen earth. For hours, it was nothing but steel, diesel, and pressure. Because Parker wasn't just moving dirt anymore. All right, here's the first scoop going in. He's one step closer to finding out if his new operation will secure his mining future. He was pushing against the end of the season, the weight of his own choices, and the real fear that this last gamble might break the very machines he was relying on to save him. It wasn't careful, it wasn't smart, and it wasn't safe. But the competitive Parker wasn't looking for safety. He was chasing something bigger than caution, something louder than reason. How do you make that transition, from mining in one place to the next? And by the time the cut was finally opened, the damage had already been done. What should have been a planned, measured dig had turned into an act of desperation. And even if they made it to the gold, there was no guarantee that the risk would pay off. Yet they had to face the truth and see how much gold they had managed to get as the ground got covered in a thick layer of snow. And so they weighed the gold, each crew member highly anticipating the outcome. The first weigh-in was from Big Red, and she gave them 100.1 ohms. Decent, but nowhere near Parker's target. Then came the untested ground, the frostbitten cut that nearly killed their equipment. When the final gold tray was poured, the scale read 282.3 ohms, worth around $740,000. A number that saved the gamble from becoming a complete failure. And by the end of the season, Parker's crew had stacked 5,425.40, more than $14 million in gold. But that number didn't tell the full story because beneath that pile of success was a near catastrophe. A reminder that no matter how far Parker's drive takes him, the line between record-breaking glory and full-blown disaster gets thinner every single year. Yet Parker was not the only one in a rush against time. Rick Ness came back with the weight of silence, pressing on him harder than the frozen dirt he planned to dig through. He had vanished from the noise and dust of the goldfields only to return with a single plan and no backup route, risking everything on a strip of untouched ground buried 160 feet beneath Raleigh Valley. A piece of land so raw and silent that no miner had ever dared touch it before. To Rick, this wasn't just another season. It was a full-blown resurrection attempt. The kind of comeback that either rewrites your name into legend or erases it completely, and Rick knew it as he stood over that frozen stretch of Yukon wilderness, staring down $1 million gamble on what he called the Vegas Valley Cut. Unproven and deep, a place where old maps offered no comfort, and drilling pay dirt felt more like a whisper than a promise. His past hotspots had pulled in an average of 300 ounces a week. Solid ground that had once made him one of the top dogs in the Klondike. But this place wasn't that. It was nothing. Just quiet land in a dream he couldn't afford to get wrong because the machines were already running. The crew was already working, and every single man with him knew the cost of coming back just to fall. Despite the unease in the air, they drilled, they pushed, they clawed through permafrost in doubt, dropping deeper than they'd ever dared before, passing layer after layer without finding any gold. During this time, the crew almost lost hope in Rick's gamble, all fearing that they would go back home with little or no money. Regardless, they kept pushing, telling themselves that they had nothing to lose. Well, except Rick. Finally, the test trays came up. Not rich, not poor, just enough to keep hope barely breathing, but not enough to silence the voice in Rick's head that kept asking if he had come back, only to burn through everything he had left. The first run from that untested ground came in at 256.70. Not the kind of number that made headlines, but enough to remind Rick that there was still something buried down there worth fighting for. And this was enough to keep the crew from falling into the kind of despair that turns miners into ghosts long before the season ends. And it worked. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was survival. And for a man who had watched it all slip through his hands before, that was more than enough to keep the machines running and the dream alive for one more week. But in these moments of desperation, not everyone was having a tough time. While chaos swallowed the others whole, Tommy Beat stood still in the storm, unmoved by the panic that gripped the final days of the mining season. His eyes locked not on the fear of failure, but on the blueprint he had followed since the first day of the thaw. A plan born from decades of knowing exactly what not to do when time runs out and the ground begins to freeze solid. Unlike Parker, who raced, or Rick, who gambled, Tony didn't scramble. He didn't bet on forgotten ground or shoved dozers into icy rock. He simply kept the rhythm going, running multiple plants across his claim like synchronized gears in an engine that refused to stop. Tony Beats is desperate to start slewing, but he needs water, and the pipe to the pump is blocked with ice. Well, it looks like to be taut, so that's going to save her ass a little bit. Veteran miner Len Hora has spent a day clearing ice from the top half of the pipe closest to the pump. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't magic. It was a cold, calculated strategy that said, if you keep dirt moving, gold will follow. With Mike Beats on the trommel, he pulled out 251.48480, and Monica Beats pushed through the comeback cut for another 146.460. Even the massive floating dredge operated by Tony Beats himself, which once seemed like a relic lost in time, delivered 58.740, and together, the Beats family brought in 456 ounces in just 1 week. Not through panic or risk, but through calm, stubborn consistency, a number that pushed their season total to 4,800 ounces, worth over $12.6 million. While others cracked under pressure or pushed themselves to the edge, Tony's crew moved through frozen ground like it wasn't even there, unfazed by the ticking clock or the biting cold. This proved that in a season built on pressure and missteps, sometimes the only way to survive is to never play the chaos game at all. But even Tony himself has not been immune to the unforgiving and unpredictable nature of the mining business. In one of his mining operations, Tony had a serious challenge on his hands. The pipe to the pump that provided water to the sluicing operation had been blocked with ice, completely stopping their sluicing progress. Tony called in his trusted team, including veteran miner Len Hoekstra, to tackle the problem. Len spent an entire day steaming the top half of the pipe to clear the ice near the pump. "We've got to see how far we can go," Tony said as he directed Len to test the pipe further down through an access vent. "Hey, Len." "Yeah, you're a super steamer." "Okay, he just shot the whole pipe through." "Yeah, that works." Unfortunately, Tony quickly discovered that the lower end of the pipe was also frozen solid. Clearing it could take Len another 12 hours, a delay that would cost Tony a staggering $36,000 in wages, fuel, and lost gold production. Tony couldn't have this. He was determined to find a faster solution. He decided to increase the water pressure in the pipe by opening a channel to the river. This would raise the water level in the pond by 15 feet, increasing the pressure on the ice by 7 pounds per square inch. If that worked, they would be back in business. He instructed his team to open the channel. It was a bold move, and everyone held their breath as they waited to see if it would work. "We'll make it all work somehow." "Well, once we get the water to go through it by itself, then that will cut the last of the ice out. All we need is a little hole to get started, and then bingo, we would be in business." As the pressure built up, the ice finally gave way and water started flowing freely through the pipe. "Bingo!" Tony exclaimed, looking rather relieved. The frozen blockage was cleared, and they were finally ready to fire up the pump. With the water flowing again, Tony's team could get back to the most important task of sending pay dirt to the wash plant. The clock was ticking, but they were back in the game. Over at the wash plant, Tony's team worked tirelessly to get the 30-year-old trommel turning. The entire Beets family worked together, trying the best they could to get the most gold in the shortest time possible. As the water pump roared to life, Tony could finally see the fruits of their labor. Seeing the salt boxes filled with dirty water, Tony was very pleased since it signaled the start of their mining operation. To send water to the wash plant, they need their frozen pipes clear of ice. It was a small win, but it wouldn't last because in another season, Tony's score was so low that he had to find another area to mine. One time at Paradise Hill, Tony was trying to make big moves as always. It was 3 weeks into the season, and things weren't going as planned. No gold was coming in, and the situation was becoming worse considering the bills he was expected to pay to fund his mining operations. So Tony made the tough call to put the Paradise Hill operation on hold and move 40 miles away to his Indian River claims. When they left there, the whole area was already stripped and ready to go. However, we got a partial license to go mining the Indian River. We have most of the ground stripped for a month. We pick up $1 million or 2-3. Bengal dumped Tommy's lifeline of an amended water license allows him to return to his Indian River claims. And so to make enough money to continue funding the mining operations and paying his crew members, all they needed to do was take a little off and get sluicing. It seemed like a solid plan.